The 2-episode premiere of Ahsoka kicked off last week, and I loved it. Okay, admittedly, I love pretty much everything Star Wars, but this show so far seems solidly put together and introduces convincing new storylines and characters while also playing heavily on nostalgia from the Rebels TV series. And Kevin Kiner has been picking up right where he left off with the animated series, which I think has taken mixed reviews, but I'll be addressing that as well. With music being present almost entirely through this episode, there's a lot to unpack in this first episode. The music immediately screamed something unique with this percussive intro. The drums are primarily African with what sounds like a talking drum, a bone rattle, and tambourine, but the overall feel of this sparse percussion with a drum that tends to cut through actually immediately made me think of the music of No Theater, which would make sense since much of Ahsoka's character has always been tied to Japanese lore and tradition. The red crawl at the beginning was interesting as well, and it actually made me think of video games from the 90s, but this was likely paying homage to something specific that I'm just not aware of. Feel free to tell me in the comments. And there was a cool little thing happening in the music here as well. The low strings play an ostinato of quarter, 2/8, and then 2 more quarters. Or long, short, short, long, long. In total, this equals 4 beats. However, the ostinato in the upper strings is 6/8 notes, which only comes out to 3 beats. This difference in beats means that the two motivic ideas, while repetitive, constantly sound different against one another. The music builds at the end of the crawl, and these chords, while fighting against the harmony of the ostinato, are the chords we hear at the end of every film in the Skywalker saga. It demonstrates how Return of the Jedi was the end of one story, but it's now paving the way for the beginning of a new story, almost as if that movie is leading directly into this first shot. At least, that's how I interpreted this, because it was definitely intentional. Instead of resolving though, the progression moves to a deceptive cadence as we see the New Republic prisoner transport ship. There were a lot of things in this opening scene that I was trying to identify but struggled to, and it may be that these are new themes that Kiner is introducing. They may be ones that are just eluding me, or they may not be anything. But I'd love to get your insights on them as well. First is the quick horn flurry as we see the transport. The next sounds like a variation of the New Republic theme mixed with Cal Kestis' theme. But that can't be, so then what was this? Was it just a variation of the New Republic theme? Then, this descending half-step seems to enter as the two not Jedi enter. This little motif comes back as Baylan has his hallway scene moment, mowing down New Republic troops. And it was cool to see Kiner subtly nod to Vader here as well as the bass drops that characteristic major third. However, it then continues to go down, severing its tie to Vader while the descending half-step motif continued. He frees Morgan, who tells him about Ahsoka before we finally get our title screen. And with it, the horns call out Ahsoka's theme that's been with us ever since the beginning of the Clone Wars series, with Kiner as the composer even then. The next scene finally brings Ahsoka into the show. It begins with low drones, giving this location a mystifying deep history. But notice how the first 3 notes of Ahsoka's theme cut through as she removes her hood and unveils herself before returning to its previous sound. But also notice this instance of the descending half-step returning while Ahsoka solves the puzzle. As Ahsoka leaps out of the cavern, her standoff with the HK assassin droids is underscored with a chime in the piano that returns over and over again, like a church bell chiming high noon for a standoff. And as the fight gets underway, the music picks up as well. The fight is over quickly, but as the droids activate their self-destruct, the descending half-step returns, and to be honest, if you have a self-destruct feature, I feel like there are two very clear rules for efficiency of its operation. First, don't announce your self-destruct, just do it.
Initiate self-destruct protocol.
Second, don't have a countdown that is so long that someone could theoretically run away. Just blow up. At any rate, self-destructs never work, but Ahsoka's theme does come through one more time, albeit very softly right here. And I just enjoyed this little detail even though it's not music. There is moisture on the cockpit windshield. As they cut through the atmosphere and clouds, you can actually see moisture from the air accumulating into droplets and stream on the cockpit windshield. I didn't even ever think about this until seeing it, but seeing this kind of attention to detail is why I already know this is going to be a good show, and not another Kenobi! The music gets noticeably more peaceful and lighter as we return to Home 1 and the destroyed transport ship in space. But we also seem to get yet another faint new theme as Ahsoka approaches. I'm really hoping that these become ironed out quickly in the early episodes. It feels like Kiner is giving us a lot of themes without enough context or association, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But here's a theme I do recognize. As we see General Hera Syndulla for the very first time in live action, her theme from the Rebels TV show comes through. This always reminded me of Leia's theme as well, which I suppose is fitting considering the connection between Hera and Kanan, but it's great to see these themes returning for a brand new series with Kiner. Immediately after, we get this nice little reference to the original trilogy, and the music of Williams as we fade to the next scene. As we move to Lothal, triumphant fanfare music cuts through. The fanfare cuts off at one point very abruptly though as we realize Sabine is missing. And as we see Sabine, Kiner made the interesting choice of foregoing her theme initially and instead opts for this galactic punk rock that Sabine is presumably listening to, and I think this is perfectly embodying who Sabine came to represent as the Rebels show continued. Someone who bucked power and authority even when it was hers, in exchange for her own freedom and desires. But let's talk about this road for a moment. It's a massive superhighway that nobody ever seems to travel on, now or during Rebels. And then it just stops in the middle of nowhere. I mean, who designed this thing and for what purpose? Imperial tax credits at their finest, I suppose. As Sabine enters her hideout in the communications tower, her theme comes through very tenderly. It's one of the less known themes from Rebels, and you can see why in this scene as it almost gets lost in the fabric of the music around it. It's brief and moves very naturally within its harmony, and we can compare it to Ezra's theme, which comes through in the horn, far more isolated just moments later as we see his hologram. And as Ezra continues to talk, Sabine's theme returns, showcasing the connection between these two characters. These leitmotifs by Kiner are very different from many of the Star Wars themes that end up being complete melodies. Instead, these are just short motifs that are more amiable but also harder to find and identify. And I want to take a moment to mention what's been occurring in this show thus far. See, normally in the opening episode of a show, the story is written to give us an understanding of the characters, their stories, beliefs, and whatever else as we meet them for the first time. Usually the filming is paced in a way that allows for us to also hear their theme, usually in its complete form, very clearly the first time we see them as well, so that we can easily associate that theme with that character. And while Kiner is putting those themes in as we see the characters, he's not making it stand out. Instead, it's more of an Easter egg, which I agree with here, because this really isn't a new story or show. This is simply the next season of Rebels, and for anyone who is upset right now that they need to go watch Rebels before seeing this show, please understand that this is Dave Filoni's vision, and likely was for nearly a decade. The only change is that Disney allowed him to turn it into a live-action show, instead of another animated series because of the realities of streaming and production costs, and how those have changed since Rebels first aired. And Kevin Kiner gets that and is simply treating the music like it's the beginning of a new season of Rebels rather than an entirely new show. Nobody is holding the viewer's hand through this series, and why should they? The Rebels content is out there if people are genuinely interested, along with channels like mine to give people reference, and if they aren't that interested, then the importance of their opinion is somewhat saturated in my mind. I actually had to go back and reference all of the Ghost Crew themes again before making this video just so I knew what to pick out, and that was a great chance for me to heighten my experience of this show, not being handicapped by serving the larger audience. So yeah, don't expect a lot of backstory explanations that take 5 minutes to break down or themes that are being spoon-fed. This show is going to move as fast as it can. But enough of that. As Baylan and Shin speak at the end of the next scene, it almost sounds like a theme is trying to come through as the music builds, but it's still not enough for me to determine anything. I find it strange that so far none of the villains seem to have a theme, but it could also just be that I haven't identified it yet to be able to catch. As Sabine wakes from her dream in the next scene, Ahsoka's theme briefly cuts through as she flies overhead. It flirts its presence once more as the scene transitions as well. But after that, Sabine's theme takes over as she arrives a day late, fragmented, just as Ahsoka's was at first before singing through in the cello. This fragmentation of both themes highlights how the characters are incomplete as we come to find out that Sabine took on the role of Ahsoka's apprentice at some point. And I found this strange considering Sabine is not Force sensitive. If Ahsoka wasn't training Sabine to use the Force, what exactly was she being trained for? The music box being used as an instrument, along with these very childish drawings, reminds us that Sabine and Ezra were really only just children during the events of Rebels. And I love how these drawings look identical to something we would see in the Rebels series, blurring live action and animated visuals in a very convincing way. Ahsoka's theme enters next as she re-enters the scene. As she mentions the witches of Dathomir, the descending half-steps return, and I'm beginning to wonder if this could potentially be a theme for Morgan, or one of the villains.
By the minutes. I take it these patterns have meanings. You have the artist's eye.
As the conversation continues and Sabine reflects on her time with Ahsoka, a more tender version of Ahsoka's theme enters as underscoring. It becomes lower and more looming as the conversation becomes more tense between this former master and apprentice.
You never make things easy. Why should I? You never made things easy for me.
As Ahsoka inspects the lightsabers, short motifs hide in the low strings. However, I'm not able to assign these to anything as I continue to listen for a clear and discernible theme for Baylan or the other antagonists. I'd love to know if any of you hear anything during this, though, that sticks out to you.
Master and an apprentice.
That would be my assumption. If both trained.
Master and an...
In the 500 years, I've only known one student who built a saber such as this. Baylan.
But then we hear another version of Sabine's theme as she speeder bikes away along the still entirely empty highway. As Ahsoka speaks to Hera in the next scene, I became really confused because while it's faint, it sounded like we were hearing Cal Kestis' theme. I'm sure I'm hearing this wrong or something, but this is all I could hear at the beginning of this scene.
She took the map off the ship when I explicitly told her not to.
That is, until Hera jokingly brings up Ahsoka's master. As she does so, the music immediately turns darker, and we get chills as the harmony slips into the first two chords of Darth Vader's theme, and then continues to outline the motif as we understand Ahsoka's thoughts, to immediately go to the Dark Lord before moving to Anakin Skywalker. This was a great yet subtle moment for Kiner, flirting with the music of John Williams. It's there and clear and yet not trying to be noticed, just like the memory and knowledge that Ahsoka has to carry with her every day. Her theme follows this in the low strings, answering the Dark Lord's music as she answers the query by Hera, yet it clearly has been affected by the moment as it sounds more like Vader's theme as Ahsoka compares her actions to that of Anakin's.
I'm sure you had your reasons. Times.
Walked away from Sabine.
As Sabine engages in battle, the taiko war drumming that Kyner enjoys using for battles begins to come through. We heard this as well in Tales of the Jedi and other places. The music builds from there, and notably, the descending half-step begins to return, further emphasizing its mysterious importance. But overall, the music doesn't offer much as the fight leads to another person in Star Wars surviving being stabbed by a lightsaber. The descending half-step returns again and builds into the silence as Sabine falls. Now, granted, we already know what happens in the next episode since Disney released 2 episodes at the beginning, and again, I was a little disappointed that we went with the lightsaber survival thing yet again, but I'm also curious what all of you think. Were there any themes that I missed? Do you think that the descending half-step actually serves a specific purpose, or is Kyner more just using it for a general sinister sound? What do you think of the show so far, and how did you feel about the way Kyner and Filoni just jumped right back in as if this was the next season of Rebels? Tell me in the comments below what you think, and consider checking out my Patreon page using the link in the description, where you can help support this channel for as little as $1 a month, or download PDFs and MP3s of projects as I complete them, along with other perks at higher tiers. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to learn more about the music of a galaxy far, far away. And as always, may the be with you.